Welcome into the Beat Sessions, your place for all things music. I'm your host, Mitchell Weary. Let's talk about legendary British rockers Deep Purple. They are back with a new record entitled Equals One. They released that on July 19th. This is the 23rd studio album for the band, their follow-up to 2021's Turning to Crime, a collection of covers, if we want to go back to the last album of original material, just the year before that, 2020's Whoosh, which sounds more like an onomatopoeia for what happens when a rock star walks into the room, but I digress. One of the most influential and one of the loudest rock bands that ever existed, Deep Purple, is still making music, seriously, like 60 years later. It's insane. And there's still 3/5 of that Mark II iteration, which I would argue is the most well-known. I think most people that are familiar with Deep Purple are familiar with the outfit that played together from 69 to 73. Ian Pace there, still at the drums from day one of the most legendary drummers of all time. Ian Gillan, not the original lead singer, but certainly the most well-known, still there. And Roger Glover, not the original bass player, but those two came together at the same time. And he's a guy that maybe I'm a little biased, but I don't think he gets as much love. Seriously, it's like 58 years, something like that later, you still have, pretty much your best lead singer and your best rhythm section doing the damn thing. I think a lot of people would argue that this band was at its best when Ritchie Blackmore was playing guitar. I totally agree with that 100%. It's nice to still have those pieces, but I'd argue that this band with that dynamic, would probably never make music that's as good as they made when he was there. Steve Morse, a great guitar player. He was there for about 28 years. Unfortunately, his wife being sick with cancer, he had to step aside. So we get Simon McBride on this record. First time we hear him on a recording with Deep Purple, and he sounds great. He does a really nice job. This is a band it's interesting. I'm going to review the new Eminem record. I've had to think about it a lot, and there's elements of Deep Purple in this record that are very similar, and that relevance comes up. The argument of, does Deep Purple still need to make music? Is it worth it? Is it still good, etc., etc.? And there's a banality to this whole thing that people keep bringing up that I'm just tired of. And I may have said this before on the channel, but there's something that's so significant about time and place and just being there perfectly for both. And part of the unholy trinity, there with Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, this is a band that didn't start off with a heavy sound, but I think brilliantly made that turn, and as I stated, ended up becoming one of the most influential rock and roll acts of all time. There's that I'm drawing a blank on the name of the movie, but there's that movie about the guy that he wakes up and no one knows who the Beatles are, and he keeps playing those songs, and ultimately they don't resonate with that contemporary audience. It's the irony of the film, right? I think it's probably the most brilliant aspect to it, and I think that bands like Deep Purple, being there at the right time, in the right place, and just throwing down something that people wanted to hear, it's going to be impossible to ever replicate that, right? Or, maybe you could make a comeback and, completely lead an entire, I guess, subgenre of music into a different direction. But, the brilliance lies in what they did with albums like Machine Head during that time period. And so I think the thing that I argue with this record is that I love that Deep Purple is still making music, and I love that they're making music that's true to them, but like many bands in this situation, being as influential as they have been, there's so many directions that both metal and hard rock have taken. Many, for better. There's definitely some genres that I think all of us can agree, we could have all those things disappear, and we would be better for it. But you have like the influencer reflecting on all this stuff that has been a byproduct of what they've produced, and then making music that's, again, true to their sound, but also maybe trying to push the bar a little bit. And it feels like there's moments on this record where they're doing that, and I applaud them for it. I applaud them for staying in their lane too, and again, just doing what they do. It'd be like criticizing Picasso for, still painting square faces or triangular faces, right? His style, cubism, it's what it is. And there's and I think that this is where the comparison is relevant. And I'm not really into art, so off the top of my head, I cannot give you some of the most famous Picassos out there. But obviously, there's those influential pieces that people that know they recognize, right? And there's just what those paintings brought to the table at that time frame, the influence that they had, and the direction that they moved art into that makes them so special. And it's the same thing with a band like Deep Purple. Not all of their records are going to have that impact, and it's really just circumstantial is all it is. This is a record that I would argue I'm not super thrilled about it. Bob Ezrin here for his fifth go around. It's not tight for a band that comes out of that era of rock and roll where you're producing records, you're making albums and thinking about songs and their placement with all of that in mind. This thing is 51 minutes long and totally bloated. There are easily 3 songs that you could axe on this thing to make it just a tighter, just more enjoyable experience from start to finish. It definitely feels like it begins to lag, and it's unfortunate because I'd argue that the better tracks are coming towards the back end. And so it's frustrating to sit through a handful of mediocre songs and then you get this, length of album that by the time you get to the good stuff, you're just kind of like, you're feeling wishy-washy anyway. It's definitely the most unfortunate thing about the record. I'm going to get into the track listing to kind of make that point here. Show Me is your opening track. You get this slow build with these it's almost like muted guitars. Think of New Noise by the band Refused. That's what the guitar reminds me of in the intro. Builds, drums, and bass and vocal come in. The vocal's interesting. Ian Gillan for as incredible as his career has been, his voice, and there's no reason why his voice should be. He's like 78 or 79 years old. Voice isn't quite there. He's got a swagger on this record that totally works. So I like that new angle that he's taking to what he does and what he brings to the band. But the recitative vocal on this song, it's a little interesting to me. Like I don't know if I like it quite yet. I'm erring on the side of digging it. I shouldn't say erring, but favoring that side of liking it. But I still have to give it a few more listens before I really decide. I feel like the chorus fills out with some very proggy stuff, and then you get a solo that is incredibly proggy. And again, this is a band that wasn't always heavy. There's a number of different directions that they've taken their records in over the years, for better or for worse. I, again, would argue that 69 through 73, that Mark II iteration, that's when this band was really at their best, I think. A Bit on the Side is your second track. You get this driving bass, really cool riff to open. Dig that about the song. It's simple, but it also plays with space well, another great feature. The bass is going to own the verses on this song. I think it's a great element of the track. Fantastic guitars that play around it. It's probably one of my 2 favorite songs in the opening part of this record. Sharpshooter, you get the pace just keeps going with this thing. It's a bit more sludgy. This is a song I'd argue that is probably the most like that Mark II generation that I keep referring to. Bluesy shift in the verse. Song has this like upbeat, funky punch. It's definitely a fine example of Deep Purple, I think, when they're at their best. Portable Door is your 4th song. Got this, Back to the Drive of the organ. That's a great element to their music. Something I failed to mention previously in the review, but great, a number of great examples on this record. where the prominence of the organ, that kind of signature element of their sound, is super fun, and I enjoyed it a ton. Um, it's a banger of a track. I would say that this stretch of three songs right here is so solid, and then this is where the album gets a little iffy for me. Old Fangled Thing is your fifth track. You get a bit of this like 80s glam hard rock feel, and talk about a band that starting off when they did, and you think of the different phases of metal, especially going through the 80s with the 80s glam thing, amongst many other phases. And I would argue, just a little side note, I think the two best phases of metal are its inception, obviously, and then the development and advent of thrash metal. Thrash metal, obviously, super amazing. I mean, some of you might disagree with me on that. That's totally fine. But one of my favorite metal subgenres for sure. Old Fangled, it's got elements to it that I like, but it's a song that I, given the runtime of this record and the quality of the songs that we're going to discuss here in a moment, I just think that this one falls a little short. I think that if I was Bob Ezrin, this is one that I would have maybe considered falling off, just to keep this thing tighter. Your sixth song, If I Were You, mellows things out, relatively speaking. It's the verses are sultry. It's definitely like a bitter love song, but the chorus is going to fill out. Coda turns more towards this driving rocker, and a solid track, but another one that I think that maybe could have done without it. Speaking of which, Pictures of You. This is not a Cure cover. This is their own song, Pictures of You. Organ driven, keeps this album in a mellow zone, but this is a song that it just falls flat for me. I could live without this stretch of three songs on this record. I think if you axed all those, you'd get a runtime that's fallen right into that zone. Again, for a classic rock outfit, that some of their best records, that's what they're doing. This concise, rockin', just beautiful experience that keeps you wanting to just flip that record back and forth over and over again, versus having to go between two records of good stuff, but stuff that's kind of mediocre at moments. I'm Saying Nothing is your eighth song. This is a great song. This is the album starts to get back to a nice run here. Nice chunky groove out the gate. Carries the track. This riff here. Great solo, and I love. This is something that Deep Purple does so well. There's this solo element where it starts with guitar, goes to organ, and then shifts back to guitar, and that exchange is really nicely done. I'm a big fan of what's going on in that track there. Lazy Sod is your ninth song. Has just a really nice blues driven feel to it. Bit of that kind of like boogie blues, kind of that ZZ Top feel as well. Dope organ breakdown again. That element really coming into play strong here. It's a nice touch. Now You're Talking is your 10th song. This song, another hard hitter. Great solo component to this track. Lots of different hard rock elements at play. Again, talking about a band that's been around for so many decades, all the different elements that they've influenced, and now coming back and playing with all of those different genre components, and doing a nice job of bringing them together. It's a fun track. No Money to Burn is your 11th song. Big drums, drive a guitar, and organ riff that play with space pretty well. This is a pretty decent song. I'll Catch You, your 12th track. Slow burner, with that noir kind of feel. I really like the feel of this track. Kind of has that dark, sultry. Again, think of like film noir, and dig the way that the chorus fills out on this particular track. And then Bleeding, obviously, is your final song. Nice metal riff to open. Organ just backs this solid guitar component. Chorus brightens up. Solo's going to usher in a big shift in the song. It feels like Jethro Tull on this track a lot. I really enjoyed the way this album ended. Song becomes mellow and jangly for a bit of kind of like a breakdown in the middle, and then shifts back to that heavier feel to finish. There's a lot of bright points on this record, but ultimately, as a whole, Bob Ezrin, I feel like there's a few things that you could have done to trim the fat on this thing to make it a better listening experience. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. gonna have to pass on the vinyl as well, unfortunately. But I do applaud Deep Purple for still being in the game. And you know what? Like, screw all the screw all the haters and all the critics that will sit there and, oh yeah, they might sit in a rut and they're still producing. It's like, it's such a banal thing to say. I think that what makes Deep Purple so special is cultivating that style. And if that's your style, that's your style, even if it is 60 years down the road. And I think fans of the band will definitely find value in a number of these tracks, if not all of them. And some of you might think that the vinyl package is worth it. And if that's the case, so be it. Comment. Let me know what the production quality on it is like. I just streamed this thing. I might be privy to buying it if y'all can convince me that the production is solid enough. But in the meantime, I hope you find this review helpful. Please like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel, do all the things to help me blow this project up in 2024, and stay tuned throughout the week for more album reviews. We'll see you next time on the Beat Sessions.